Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about Heir of Fire by Sarah J Maas. This is the third full book in the Throne of Glass series. I am doing something a little bit different in this video than what I've been doing in previous videos. If you've missed them, I have a whole playlist. I will link that up above if you want to go check it out. I've been rereading all of Sarah's books and doing in-depth spoilery discussion videos as I read them. Previously, I'd been going chapter by chapter, which was very time and labor intensive. And as these books are getting longer, I just don't think I can quite keep up with that anymore. So here's what we're doing. I am going to film a clip about every 100 pages that I have read, and I'm taking notes on my phone of key things that I want to point out or talk about. This will be spoilery. Some of this might be Easter eggs or important things I noticed, key elements of the plot of what's happening, and kind of give you a sense of how I'm feeling as I'm reading this. This is my first time rereading the series. It's been many years since I read Heir of Fire, and I don't remember a lot of the details at this point. I remember like the vague outlines of what happens, but a lot of it is kind of like, oh yeah, that happened. So let's go ahead and get into the first 100 pages of Heir of Fire. I think this puts us at the first 13 chapters or so. And for reference, this book is about 560 pages long, which is why I am not doing the as detailed chapter by chapter stuff like I did before. So far, I'm really enjoying my reread. It's been fun, and it's also been kind of nice to not be stopping and taking notes and underlining everything, but just kind of noting key things as I'm listening, especially because my life has just been so busy lately. So we open the book with Celaena. She's been in Wendlin for like 10 days or something, and she very quickly decides she is not going to kill the targets she was sent there to assassinate, and she just starts drinking a lot, which is an interesting choice. She has plans to find Queen Maeve and see what she can learn from her or get her to do so that she can help save people as she has promised to do. The target she was supposed to kill was Galen Shriver, who is her distant cousin and the prince. She sees him riding out to do blockade running, even though he's the prince. Everybody loves him, and she's like, nah, I'm not gonna kill him. It's not gonna happen. While kind of in the depths of despair, she's mistaken for being a unhomed person. The horror. I'm like, I don't love that this is like the lowest low for Celaena, but okay. She meets somebody who is going to be very important for the rest of the series. Rowan. Rowan is a fae male with green eyes, tattoos on his face, silver hair, and he is much older. Even though he looks like he's like 20, he's much older. So we're going into the old immortal male with the younger, seemingly human woman trope, but not just yet, because it's going to take a while for that to happen. He has better senses of smell than humans do. He can smell her bloodline and knows who she is. And he tells her he is taking her to Dornell because Queen Maeve wants to see her. Important note, he ends up being one of, I have it written down somewhere, but one of like 6 elite guards and attendants to Queen Maeve. So he holds this kind of high up role, and his backstory with that is going to end up being important eventually. We find out that all fae have a secondary animal form, and that Celaena's, or Aylin's as we now know she is, her animal form is human. It feels a little bit like a cop-out, but whatever, we'll go with it. Then we get Chaol's perspective. Aedion arrives. He is Aylin's cousin, but he is also the general of the king's army. This time though, when Chaol sees him, he's like, holy shit, he and Aelin look super similar. They have the same eyes, they have similar face structures. How did nobody put this together? That's what I'm wondering. Like, how did no one put this together? Is it just because he's looking? Maybe it has something to do with her shifting abilities. I don't know, it's kind of weird. We find out that Aedion has one of those creepy black rings that the king is passing around, so perhaps he's being mind controlled like the others. We don't really know, but very likely. And he's kind of an ass, known for debauchery. Gosh, this is so heavy. I need to like switch arms occasionally. But also I went to the gym today, so that might be part of it. Then we meet Manon, and I wasn't sure when we met her, but it happens real early on in this book, and I am so happy. Manon is one of my favorite characters. She is a witch, and I had forgotten just how brutal she is when we first meet her. Like, she comes in with a bang, and it's really interesting to see the character arc that she's gonna go on throughout the series. So she is an Iron Teeth, but she's posing as a Croken. They wear these red cloaks that they get when they start menstruating, but for reasons, she has one of them, and so she pretends to be one to try to ferret them out and hunt them down and kill them. We get Dorian's perspective. We find out that his father keeps Aedion as a general because he's good about putting down rebellions in order to save more of his people from dying. I feel like that's really the key piece of information we get from Dorian's perspective. Then we get a perspective from Sorsha, who is a young healer in the palace, and there's some interesting things going on with her that I suspect are going to be important later on in the story. She's a healer. She's got a big crush on Dorian, which is a little bit weird, but she's like, yeah, I'll keep all your secrets. However, she's writing letters to someone who wants details about the castle. That seems really sketchy to me. We also find out that Sorsha is originally from a village in Fenharrow that was burned to the ground. I feel like this is probably a connection to a character in either the short stories or a previous book, but I cannot remember enough details to be sure who Sorsha is connected to. So if you know the answer to this, feel free to comment below. Maybe we'll find out later in the book though. Back to Aelin. She meets Maeve. Maeve tells her that Prince Rowan is a very distant relative of Aelin's and is Maeve's nephew of sorts, whatever that means, right? We find out more about Aelin's parents, and this was really interesting. Her parents eloped against Maeve's will, because technically it was against the law for them to be together because she had decided their bloodlines were too volatile to be mixed. However, her mother, to let them escape, vowed that she would let Maeve inspect her child, and then didn't live up to that vow and kept Aelin away from her and tried to get Aelin to suppress her power as much as possible. So why is that? What are we missing? What was her mom afraid of? These are all important questions that we probably need answers to. We find out that the ability to summon fire is extremely rare and valuable, and that is what Aelin can do. Maeve is generally pretty creepy in the scene, I would say, but she said that she does not get to come to Doranel yet because half-breeds don't get to come until they have proven themselves worthy. So it's kind of racist and not great. But she's going to be instead training in Mistward with Rowan until he thinks she's good enough to go there. And then once she arrives, Maeve promises she will truthfully answer Aelin's questions about the keys. So Aelin's like, okay, I'll do whatever I have to do. That's my goal. I made a promise. This is what we're doing. Maeve wants her to take her rightful place as queen. We have a lot of Aelin and Rowan fighting with each other, bickering. They punch each other quite literally. It's kind of entertaining. Then we go back to Manon. We find out that the witches value gold speckled eyes. They're considered really valuable, and Manon's eyes are pure dark gold. That's important for later on. We'll find out more about that. We know that the witches possibly want revenge for what happened to Bobby Yellowlegs. They're investigating, trying to figure out who killed her. We know that Aelin/Selena killed her. We're gonna call her Aelin from here on out, I think, since we now know who she is. And we find out that the king has offered the witches a gift of wyverns that he has been breeding in Farian Gap, and they can keep them after the war if they fight for him. So we're seeing more of his plots unfolding. Manon is at this witch gathering that is discussing all these things. We get a scene with Chaol, and the main thing that's interesting about this is he goes looking for Aedion, and Aedion is nowhere to be found at his party. Everybody saw him go somewhere else. I would suspect that Aedion is not who he appears to be, that he is maybe not the playboy that he puts on as a persona, but to be determined for sure. Back with Aelin, we have her hard at work in the kitchen with two characters who I love, Emrys and Luca, who are both half fae. They prefer the term demi-fae to the half-breeds, understandably, which is kind of offensive that the full fae call them. Emrys, which I have forgotten little details like this, Emrys is gay. He has a male mate named Malachi. This I think is interesting because it's laying the groundwork this early on for the possibility of there being queer mates among the fae. So I don't know why we don't get more of that. But Emrys is gay. So, okay, maybe we'll do more with that later. We'll see. We find out that some people believed that the ancient gods had bred with ancient humans in order to give them magic. So maybe that mythology could be a connection to some of the stuff we're seeing in Crescent City. We don't know for sure. And then lastly, we have another perspective with Manon. We meet Asterin, who is her second, part of the 13, all of these witches who are part of her kind of crew. They're now in the Ferrying Gap, where they're going to meet up with the king. Manon thinks the place smells wrong. She is not incorrect, but she clearly senses that something is off about perhaps this gift being given to them. One of the matriarchs wears a crown of barbed stars, which is really interesting. It's supposed to like ground her magic, even though it hurts or something. It's kind of interesting. And the three principles of the witches are obedience, discipline, and brutality. Interesting. Okay, so that is where we're at with Heir of Fire. So far, so good. I'm enjoying it. I'm going to read about another 100 pages. So where's that going to take us? Through the end of chapter 24. So we're going to do that, and then I'll come back. Is this going to make the video shorter? Yeah, I think somewhat shorter than my videos had previously been. Certainly a lot less time intensive for me, but it's still fun. So I will be back when I have more key takeaways from the next set of chapters. Hey y'all, so it has been a minute since I've been on here. Basically what happened was I pretty quickly read, oh geez, it's moving, so I'm like recording on my laptop because it's been a time. I pretty quickly read the next 100 pages, and then I proceeded to have zero time because we were rushing to get ready, have our apartment sublet for the summer, and then we were traveling, and it has just been a lot going on. So I am finally here, like not long before the live show, days before, to talk about the next section of things I have notes on so that I can keep reading. I also don't have the physical book with me here. I'm in Louisiana for several weeks. I had originally intended to have this all done before I left, but I didn't, hence the different background. But so I'm going to look through my notes. It's been a minute since I read these, but I think it'll come back to me. We're going to go through this quickly, and then I'm going to, find a way to... All right, I was trying to record on StreamYard. It was glitching, so we're just going to do it this way. I'm going to hold my phone and read off my notes on my computer. Like we're just... This is where we're at right now, because I don't have like a regular camera. It's just, this is where we're at with this. Beginning with Manon's perspective, we have Aelin. Rowan is trying to get her to shift into her Fae form, and he pushes her and finally puts her somewhere dangerous. She ends up facing this creature that takes her through her worst memories, and she does in fact shift because of the traumatic response. After that, where she's like crying and whatever, he calls her an undisciplined coward and a child. So it's kind of an extreme way to get her to shift, but it is effective and maybe what she needs at that point. Keep in mind, there's no romantic tension between the two of them that we know of just yet, which is probably for the best given that. Kale's dad wants him to go home. Sorsha still has a thing for Dorian. I still think that whole thing is kind of weird, and we'll continue to talk more about it. We have Manon's perspective with her and her 13's catchphrase that we will see. It's classic throughout the series, from now until the darkness takes us. I've got to say, Sarah J Maas is good at doing like catchphrases for series. That's a really good one. I do love Manon. She's my favorite. We find out she has an extra eyelid, which is helpful for flying. I thought that was kind of a cool invention, sort of bird-like, I guess. She is her grandmother's heir. Her grandmother wants her and the 13 to be the wing leaders of these new wyverns and wants the Iron Teeth to rule. So she's aiming for power. She's pushing Manon to try to help her get that power. We have Dorian and Sorsha. He keeps visiting Sorsha. She's asking questions about Selena, which I think is sketchy. And then something weird happens. His magic erupts. She says that she will hide his secret, but I feel like this is dangerous. Meanwhile, Kale follows Adian to the slums, where it turns out he is not really drunk at the party. He meets a, quote, cloaked figure with twin blades. I say, this is probably important. It is. We find out who this is later. And so he's meeting with the rebels. So I was right. Adian is not what he seems. He, cultivates this party boy image so that he can get away with meeting with rebels behind the king's back. Chaol confronts him and asks about the black ring because he's like, wait, but wouldn't you be controlled by the king? Turns out Aedion thought it seemed weird when the king gave him the ring, so he had a replica made and threw away the initial one. So he is not under mind control. He said it smelled wrong. The thing we're learning about the Fae is they have this heightened sense of smell. If something smells wrong, something's off. This is also true of the witches, which I think is important to note. Chaol tells him that Aelin is alive, and we find out a little bit of backstory that's interesting here, and this is going to be important later on in the series. Aedion was the one favored to swear the blood oath to her as his queen, and when he completed a thing for the king, he originally asked for the sword he carries that should be Aelin's as a boon, and then pretended to be kind of a swaggering bastard making a mockery of the sword when in fact it was something really meaningful to him. So he's smart, he's acting, I think he's an interesting character. We find out that Aelin's fire magic was so strong, it was concerning when she was a child because it was dangerous to libraries. So a little bit of information there. Speaking of Aelin, we go back to her perspective. We find out that Emrys, the gay guy, is a story keeper. So that I think is kind of cool. She sees how Rowan shifts. He shifts in a flash of light. So you don't see like physical form changes. There's a flash of light and suddenly he's a hawk. I think it's funny she addresses like the common questions people have with these kinds of changes of like, where do your clothes and weaponry go? He's like, I don't know, in between, I guess. I don't care. She wonders if training her is a punishment for something he did to anger the queen, because he seems to not love doing it. He bites her, I think this is in trying to get her to shift again or something, like a claiming, and gets her to shift that way, and then spits out her blood. I think, based on some things and like vague memory, I want to say there's some kind of like a mating ritual or something that involves biting and drinking blood. And I think this is the moment that he's like attracted to her, but spits it out. She thinks he's disgusted with her, but I don't think that's what's going on. I like that trope. I think it's interesting. She realizes she has all this magic that comes up when she shifts to her Fae form. She tries to push it down. We find out that Rowan's power smells like snow and pine. And it turns out he's training her because he has an ability that can keep her under control. He's able to remove all of the air and smother her fire to kind of keep her safe as she's training. He says he won't be biting her again. I think this is a mating ritual thing. She tells him she broke up with Chaol to keep him safe. So now he knows that she's theoretically single when he thought she had a man back home. He tells her she's worthless and would have been more valuable for the world if she died 10 years ago. Oof. She's pissed off and wants to leave and goes off running. I think he's freaked out because he's kind of into her, but also he's pissed off because she is being kind of immature and not doing what she needs to do. And he's like, get it together. He says, is this what you do? Run away when things get hard? And then he realizes that she is actually grieving because he didn't know. She runs away. She stupidly lights a fire, even though his only rule when they were traveling through those woods was no fires. 3 lanky silhouettes, neither male nor female, show up. They are skinwalkers searching for human pelts, and they wear human skins. They're definitely really creepy. One thing that I think is interesting that I didn't remember about the skinwalkers, and this came up in my Discord server, which I think is a fair point, is that it is unfortunate that the only sort of non-binary coded creatures are monsters, and I can see that standing out to some people, so that's not great. Was that the intent? Maybe not, but it's still like, yeah, I see how that is not great. I don't know that that's something I had remembered initially, so I was grateful to have that brought to my attention. Rowan, of course, goes after her, finds her, says she has to shift in order to survive the skinwalkers. We hear the skinwalkers talking and say he smells like storm winds and steel. Turns out you can't kill them with a mortal weapon, so the best thing to do is run. So she's like, well, my magic isn't mortal, so she uses her magic to burn them. And then we get this explanation of magic wells and how they work, that you have to, and this is very interesting, because if we're reading the Crescent City series, this is definitely a link to how magic works there, where he talks about, okay, there's these wells. Some people reach the bottom in minutes or in hours. He's super powerful, so it takes him a full day to reach the bottom of his well. But if you don't have control, you can burn out. Now, in the Crescent City series, right, we have the drop, which is getting down to the bottom of your magic well, and then some of it gets released for the Asteri, but it's a really similar concept. So I think that's where we're getting some crossover in terms of world building, which is really interesting. We find out that iron, such as iron chains, can prevent the use of magic. This is an important fact that will come up later in the series. Then we have Manon's perspective. The witches are choosing their wyverns, or wyverns, I don't know. We get acquainted with a few important characters. We have Petra, who is the blue blood heir. These are the different witch clans. And Iskra, who is the yellow legs heir. Petra is siding with Manon, as Manon and Iskra are vying for Titus. This is the really big, bad wyvern, right, that they both want. Iskra pushes Manon into the pit, clearly trying to kill her. Manon's grandmother orders that no one jump in after her. Like, they're pretty ruthless. What's interesting, though, is she falls in with Titus, this giant wyvern who starts to attack her, and the bait beast that they put in just to, like, piss off the bigger wyverns they think is too small to be important, is kind of worthless, takes Manon's side against Titus. So she uses her sword, which is named Wind Cleaver, or had been, and then changes to Iron Cleaver, to free the bait beast. She cuts Titus's tail, and then the bait beast kills Titus, so he is scrappy, and her and the beast, the bait beast, meet eyes. And this is a really important moment for a character that we know and love. This is Abraxos. This is Abraxos. She chooses this bait beast, this kind of scrappy runt of the pack, so to speak, as her wyvern, and names him Abraxos after the ancient serpent who held the world within his coils at the behest of the three-faced goddess, which is like a fun little piece of mythology thrown in there. Asterin, her second, is whipped for not protecting Manon. Again, just we see like the brutality. Meanwhile, her grandmother, Manon's grandmother, is pissed that she picked Abraxos. She's like, I don't know if he can even fly. I don't think any of the other wyverns will accept his dominance. But Manon is like, no, I see his warrior's heart. He's mine. I love it. It's so good. Like, this is a relationship all its own that I think is beautiful. Then we have a perspective with Chaol and Dorian. Chaol brings Adian to the tomb under the castle and is talking with him. Dorian overhears them, realizes who's there, goes and uses his ice magic on Adian, and then looks at him, sees the same gold eyes and the face that he shares with Selena, and realizes who Selena is. This is his, like, aha moment. Like, oh shit, my mortal enemy. I met her as a child. What? Dorian agrees to keep their secrets, but wants nothing to do with them. He feels hurt. He's pissed. And he's also conflicted about the fact that his father kind of needs to die, which is understandable, but also he's going to have to get over that at some point. We find out that the person with the twin swords that Adian had been meeting is named Ren, recurring character. Ren's grandfather was named Murdaugh. Adian won't tell Ren or anybody else, the rest of the rebels, where Aelin is, which is probably smart. We find out that most of the original court of Terrasen is dead, but they don't know what happened to Alid, a young woman who was a year younger than Aelin and the heir to Lord Cal and Lady Marion. I have a suspicion about who this might be. I don't remember the details, but I think she does show up in an interesting way. And then we find out that Ren and Adian back in the day had been rivals because Adian was favored to take the blood oath to Aelin, and Ren's father thought that he should be favored for it. And we find out that this blood oath is basically pure submission, sealing him as her lifelong protector, usually involving marriage. That is going to be an important conflict as well later on. So that is where we're at. I'm going to go read the next chunk of the book, and then I'll be back to discuss. Hello again. I am back. I have gotten to about 55% of the book, which is the end of part one. So this book is divided into two parts. I don't know exactly how many pages because, again, I don't have the physical book with me, but I have notes on my computer. So I'm going to go through them. We're going to talk about what happened in this chunk of the book. I think then I'm going to divide the next part into two pieces, so you'll get two more clips talking about it. There were some really interesting things that happened in this section. I am very much enjoying this book. There are some elements of it that are hitting a little differently for me than they did the first time around. So we'll talk more about that when we get to those things in the notes. But in general, I can see why this was a top book for me the first time I read it. Okay, we begin in Aylin's perspective, and we get some interesting history, world building stuff. I love this stuff because some of it crosses over into things that we know about the multiverse of Sarah J Maas. So Aelin goes into this temple of Mala. Mala was a goddess and the Lightbringer, rival to Deanna, keeper of the moon, was kind of the mythology, right? Mab had been immortalized into godhood as Deanna. However, Rowan says that the original goddess was truly named Deanna, but humans kept some ideas of traits like the hunting and the hounds when they immortalized Mab. So this is telling me that there were gods and goddesses more ancient than Mab, more ancient than the Fae Queens. And that's interesting with what we know about Crescent City. I don't know exactly how that ties in, but there are indications that there were these powerful beings prior. We find out that Rowan was not old enough to have known Mab and says he's still young for his kind, even though we know that he is hundreds of years old. We find out that sun stags held an immortal flame between their antlers and they were stolen from where they originally were. We know that Emerus, in his story about this temple that Aelin is in, said that the temple was destroyed. Rowan's like, it wasn't destroyed, it was just abandoned. There feels like something important in that disparity. I don't know what. Aelin begins to wonder how the Fae in her land could have been killed so easily now that she's seen how powerful they truly are. Makes you think betrayal is a part of it, perhaps, or something like that. Aelin is wondering why most of the male Fae are avoiding her, and Rowan tells her it's because the scent she gives off is showing that she doesn't want to be approached. She's not so sure how she feels about the fact that she can't hide what she's feeling, but she's kind of happy they're not approaching her. There's a line that I think is interesting, knowing what happens later in the series, where Aelin is thinking about the potential of being the Queen of Terrasen, which is what they want from her. And it says the weight of a crown and a throne were enough to make her feel as if she was in a coffin. If you know, you know. Foreshadowing, anybody? Yes. Then they're investigating the death of this woman that they realize was killed by the same creature she faced that made her have all these terrible memories. And an interesting note is that she realizes that the smell is similar to the smell of her parents' death. So we don't know what this creature is exactly, what it does, but perhaps it was involved in the murder of her parents. Then we get Kael's perspective. He realizes that Arabin probably knew who Selena was, and we know that that is most likely the case, and realizes how awful it was the way he treated her given that. I mean, it was awful regardless, but yeah. He takes Aedion to see her apartment, and he feels like he's seeing who she is as a woman, who she's become after the girl that he knew. Aedion thinks, when Aelin comes back, I'm never going to let her go. This is going to create a conflict later on. We find out that there was a sense of pain by the Faes and frenzied animals on the day that magic disappeared, and there were three sort of waves of magic, and we learn out later that they formed a triangle shape geographically. There was probably some kind of a spell that was happening to make all the magic disappear. Aedion questions why Kael now cares about all this stuff when he didn't before. We don't get a clear answer, but falling for Aelin is probably a lot of it. Dorian, every day, is spending time with Sorsha. This makes me nervous, but they're working together to try to control his power, and he's kind of into her. He wants to kiss her, even though he knows he probably shouldn't. She brings up drugging him as a last resort, and they talk about the fact that iron is immune to magic, so she suggests he tries to take iron supplements and see if that prevents him doing as much magic. They test it out, and it is fairly effective, so he starts taking iron supplements to have more iron in his blood every day. He wants to sleep with her, he ends up kissing her, and then she just like leaves, even though we know that she is kind of into him. This relationship is weird to me, and I'm super skeptical of it. I don't know that we're supposed to be, but that's how I'm feeling. Is it because I have some memory of what happens? Maybe. I'm not sure. They decide they're going to pretend that these iron supplements are actually just a contraceptive potion for him because he's known to get around with the ladies. I also just think it's interesting, the idea that there's a contraceptive potion for men in this world. We get Manon's perspective. Abraxos refuses to eat the meat that she tries to feed it, which is what's being fed to all of the other wyverns. So she's like, well, if you won't eat it, I will. So she takes a bite and spits it out because it tastes off. So she ends up going hunting for Abraxos. But this, I think, is important because we know that there's something wrong with the food that is being given to these wyverns. Manon gets Abraxos flying after he almost falls. This is a really exciting moment, but she has to because her grandmother has given her an ultimatum to get him flying or have severe consequences. Then Rowan is trying to teach Aelin how to control her power. She's trying to light candles without burning everything around it, and this is very difficult for her. She does it over and over and over again. It's difficult to be effective. She is getting super hungry from using all of this magic, and she asks Emrys to share some stories about Maeve. And so this is interesting. Again, we get more mythology here. We find out that Mora's shape that she took was a hawk, Mab turned into a swan, and Maeve's darkness could not be contained by any single form. Does this sound like shape-shifting Asteri from Crescent City? Yes, I think it does. Really interesting note there. We find out that Mora and Mab fell in love with humans and lost their immortality, or so the story goes. Maeve never mated, but supposedly fell for a warrior who lost the ring he intended for her, and ever since then, she cherishes her warriors above all others. What's interesting is that Rowan is quiet at this. I think this is indicative of the fact that he has a lot of trauma around the way that Maeve treats him. And what's also interesting is that she has all these warriors take a blood oath to her. If she is an Asteri, could that be a way to feed off of their magic? These powerful Fae men. I'm just saying. Then Gavriel comes and gets a tattoo from Rowan. She's curious about that. Rowan keeps getting pissed off at her. He's really harsh with her and says some terrible things. Then she goes and lashes out at Emrys. So Emrys goes to Rowan and calls him to task for the way that he's treating Aelin, because he knows who she really is. He knew from when she first arrived, and he's like, can't you see she's hopeless? She's dying inside. What are you doing to her? And Rowan realizes he needs to change something. Rowan decides, as a new form of trying to get her to learn to control her power, he will have her save someone she cares about. He puts some on the middle of ice, but then it turns out there's this big monster under the ice, and we find out that it is a monster from another realm, and it's not the only monster that has come in from another realm. So that's interesting. I put here, I guess this is one way of working out grief and anger. Like Aelin fighting the monster and like going through this really intense thing. They also fight each other physically, which again, like, is this the healthiest thing? I feel like I remember being much more into the early stages of Aelin and Rowan connecting with each other. I'm not sure why that worked better for me at the stage of life I was in, whereas now I'm kind of like, is this healthy? Is this a healthy relationship dynamic? I don't know. So my feelings on that have shifted a bit. I'm still enjoying the story. I love Manon as a character. She was always a favorite for me, but I used to, I think, like this relationship better than I do on a reread. We'll see how it continues to go. Aelin ends up keeping a sword and a ring that she takes when she defeats the monster. The ring looks like a ruby. Maybe it's actually something else. And based on stories that she hears about this monster, it's possible that they belonged to an ancient fae that went and fought it. So I think that's going to end up being maybe significant. We find out that Aelin has, while mostly intense fire magic, a drop of water magic, which allows her to potentially do healing. And her mother said that that was sort of her salvation, that she had a drop of water magic. And that was why she wanted to train to become a healer when she was young, even though she wasn't able to. Rowan suggests that she could still learn, and it might be useful for her to learn, so she's interested in that. Rowan finally opens up and shares that he lost his mate. I think it's like Lilia or something like that. She had died over 200 years ago, and he blames himself for her death. We find out that Gavriel's tattoos and his tattoos are tattoos about grief and shame and recording deaths of people close to them, but also deaths of people that they feel responsible for having killed. He says you can't change who your mate is, and he feels bad because he left her alone to go off to war seeking glory for Maeve, not realizing that she was pregnant. And when he came back, the enemies had supposedly gotten through and burned down the house, killing his wife and unborn child. And after that, in his grief and rage, he swore the blood oath to Maeve and became one of her Fae. Now, I am pretty sure I remember that it was actually Maeve who facilitated those deaths because she wanted his power for herself. And I think that that is ultimately going to be a big issue. But this is him opening up about his grief. Aelin understands him better. They kind of bond over their grief and shared trauma. And yeah, that's kind of the end of it. She is learning finally how to control her power. And that's where we are. I'm going to read about half of what's left in the book, and then I will be back to discuss, but I am liking it. I see a lot of interesting connections in this book to the Crescent City series and other larger world building things that we know, and that's been a lot of fun. Hello, we're back at the Airbnb. The live show is tomorrow night, and I have my second to last video clip for you before I finish Heir of Fire. I am continuing to really enjoy it. I feel like this book is such a huge turning point for so many characters, and I love it. Also, if the camera is shaking, apologies. I probably should have brought like a real tripod, but I did not, so this is what we have for the time being. Let me pull up my notes. A lot going on, y'all. So I made it to 75% of the book. We start with Chaol and Adian's perspective. Chaol is preparing to return to Aniel per his father's request. We find out that this place called Knoll, that is kind of on the far reaches of the kingdom, has volcanoes. And that supposedly the king went there and sacked the temple and built a tower made of black stone with no door, a strange tower, and his men kept going mad and having these strange headaches. What could this be? Anything it reminds you of? Perhaps the strange black tower in the capital city? Then we find out there is another identical one in Emirath, something like that. These are the three corners of a spell. Together, they geographically make an equilateral triangle. It also feels like we're setting up a quest to maybe take down these towers, something of that nature, but we're getting some information on the logistics of how the king did this. Then we have Manon. All of the 13 and their wyverns begin doing their own hunting. She's not about to have them eating the strange meat, doesn't know the impact it's having. They're getting all their own food, which is probably for the best. Then Manon goes to meet the Stygian spiders, which we met in the prequels, to bargain for silk to reinforce Abraxos's wings. I love where this ends up going because I feel like this is so Manon, the way that she handles this. It's great. We find out as she's discussing with the Stygian spiders that in the Wastes, the witches' homeland that they've been cursed from re-entering, there had been an immortal high king, supposedly deposed by a young woman with red hair, now calling herself High Queen. I can't remember her name, but I feel like this is probably the girl that Aelin befriended from the prequels. Did she go back because she lived near the Waste? Did she go and depose this guy and become High Queen? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is my suspicion. I don't really remember, to be honest, but I suspect that's what's going on. The Stygian spider, who had bargained with the merchant that Aelin met in the prequel novellas, said that he didn't realize that when she took 10 years of his life, some of his gifts passed to her. She just can't use them because she's not in a human body. So Manon is bargaining for all of the silk to reinforce Abraxos's wings. The spider suggests taking Manon's beauty, and Manon is like, yeah, I don't really care that much about my beauty. She's like, you know, I can't make this easy for them. So she's like inspecting the silk and like, oh, there are flaws. Why would I bargain that? And the spiders get close to the edge where she's holding it into the light and saying, what? There are no flaws in it. And then she has Abraxos use his tail to sweep them off the ledge and just steals the silk. So, you know, is this going to come back to bite her eventually? Probably. Does she care? No. No. So now we have Stygian silk to reinforce Abraxos's wings so that he can do these big flights that he hasn't been able to do before. Then there's a moment that I love because Abraxos is scared to take this jump for flying, and Manon is just fed up with him. But then Iskra whips him for it, and Manon goes after her, and they come to blows. Petra then makes a gesture of offering meat caught by her wyvern, whom Petra is the third heir, and seems to be, again, on Manon's side. And Iskra does get punished for this, but I love seeing Manon go to bat for Abraxos. We're already seeing this really strong bond form. It's one of the great relationships in these books. Back to Aelin, we find out that Rowan puts salt and iron in the ink for his tattoos so that they actually stay and aren't kind of eaten up by his fey healing magic. We found out that Aelin didn't have any siblings because her mother almost died in childbirth, and that Aelin sees her crown as just another set of shackles, which is why she wants nothing to do with it. Rowan says they're not friends because he's training her, but he's not sure what this is, and it needs time. So, you know, they're slowly connecting. There's something there. Dorian and Sorsha are now sleeping in the same bed together, but not yet having sex. There seems to be a theme that Sarah J Maas has, because the same thing was going on with Chaol and Aelin. They were making out, they were sleeping in the same bed, sharing an apartment, but weren't having sex. And now Dorian and Sorsha are doing it. It's weird. Like, I mean, it's fine, but it's interesting. He keeps giving her all these gifts. Then Dorian confronts Chaol and tells him that his only choice is whether to be Aelin's friend. Dorian has already decided, and hope he decides the same. So this is interesting. Chaol is really struggling with who Aelin truly is, even though he's not too upset that he helped her, and it seems like Dorian has kind of come to terms with it and decided that he is Aelin's friend and is on her side. Probably. He doesn't explicitly say that, but that seems to be the undertone. We find out that Narok, this, I don't know who he is, to be honest, exactly, but he has a fleet and people are scared of him. And he made the pirates scatter. Pirate Lord Rolf, who we also met in the prequels, took many of the pirates south, but now Narok's fleet is gone and Rolf is yet again on Skull Island, but people keep disappearing in the Eastern Islands. And somebody has seen from afar a pale man that's not really a man. They think that he's something made and not just human. He wears a black collar like a pet and is on some kind of a magical leash. They think these monsters were maybe being created there in the Eastern Islands, and Narok took some to Wendlin because Aelin was sent there. Rolf won't get involved in this. This is giving us important information that is setting us up for what the next part of the book and Aelin's story is going to be, and some of the information we're about to get. In Aelin's perspective, she has yet to find the bottom to the well of her magic, but the more stories she hears about Maeve, the more she hates her, which is fair. She's kind of awful. A lot of people in the Fae and the Demi-Fae begin calling her Aelin Fireheart. This is going to be a repeated theme. Aelin starts getting strangely grumpy and territorial about Rowan, and the other males are still avoiding her. What could that be about? Some kind of a mating thing, perhaps? We'll see. Then the Feast of Beltane happens, and Rowan has her doing this thing with candles to train her magic. Music ties her to the magic, and then she goes too far and starts to burn herself up, and it becomes really, really dangerous. He creates ice to cool her down. She ends up being okay, but it's weird because it came on quickly, and so later on, Rowan kind of says, no, you didn't reach the end of your magic. You just let it take control instead of controlling it. While he's cooling her down in these baths, Rowan sees her back and the scars on it and finds out that she had been in Endovir and begins to realize why she's reacted the way she has to things he has done and said, because Maeve knew this was her background and did not inform him. And so he feels kind of shitty and sort of apologizes because he realizes, oh shit, she wasn't being immature. She had all this trauma. He's now pissed at Maeve, who knew, and he feels this territorial desire to protect her. Again, what does this mean? I think it's clear. Rowan kind of takes off because he's pissed at Maeve, but Aelin thinks he left because he didn't really care about her, but then he realizes she would think that, and so he comes back, he brings her to his bedroom and says she's going to start staying with him from then on. Not in like a romantic sort of way, but just he's going to protect her. He apologizes because he didn't know, and then we got all these caretaking scenes. He's making sure she has enough food, making sure she gets enough rest, and it's really quite sweet, to be honest. We learn that a Karanan is a very rare type of connection that are between certain fae, a blood connection where you can share power with one another, but you have to be compatible, it's really rare, and forced bonds have been outlawed because they're pretty horrific. We get an explanation of why Aelin had some apparent memory loss of her true identity due to solitary confinement that she experienced in Endovir, and she says she doesn't want her scars healed because they remind her of her goals. She also fears that being Aelin instead of Selena will make her kill the world from spite because it'll tap into all her pain and anger over what was done to her family and her home. Rowan accuses her of wanting to take on pain in order to pay for her guilt. And then there's a quote that I thought was pretty great where he said, "At least if you're going to hell, we'll be there together." And there's mention of a dark god. So this I think is interesting. Again, is their idea of hell the same as the hell from the Crescent City series? We don't know, but who knows? Then there's more training montages. He's training her to fight with magical weapons. So turning fire into a shield or a dagger or whatever. So she works on that. In Manon's perspective, her grandmother threatens to kill her if she and Abraxos don't make the crossing, this big flight thing. The 13 are like ready to fight for her, and lo and behold, they make the crossing successfully with the Stygian spider silk on Abraxos' wings. Lastly, we go back to Aelin's perspective yet again. Rowan realizes that Aelin has been practicing on her own outside of their regular times. She's definitely building the respect of some of the demi-fae that are in that area. She keeps trying to reach her water magic, the drop of water magic she has, but she hasn't been able to. She's struggling with that. Then they find another dead demi-fae with the same strange circumstances as the other ones, and for the first time, Aelin realizes that the smell is also familiar because it is similar to the monster she ran into in the labyrinth under the castle, and realizes that this might be the made monsters, the monsters the king was making under the castle. Then there's a moment where Selena realizes that the fact that she attacked Chaol after Nehemia's death probably means he's not her mate, because it's very unlikely that if he was her true mate, that her fae mating thing would let her attack him. She'd be more protective of him. So that I feel like is kind of an important turning point for her emotionally. Even though she'd broken up with him, it's the realization that like, okay, well maybe he's also just like not the one for me. Clearly she's building something with Rowan here, to be determined, but that's the direction we're going. They go looking for the monsters that they think are killing all of these demi-fae, and they don't just find monsters, they also find a bunch of soldiers who have been sneaking onto shore. These are the people who've been sent to attack Wenlin. We find out there are 3 of these creatures with Narok's men, and that Narok is not really a man, but he's also some kind of a monster, and that they've been going after the demi-fae and experimenting on them, which is pretty awful. So they go after a creature. Aelin gets kind of enthralled by it, and Rowan ends up biting her, even though he said he never would again, to get her away from it, to kind of like wake her up. It's very creepy. She uses her fire on it, and then she uses the skinwalkers to create a trap and make them kind of fight each other and get away. They then have enough time to go back to the place they've been training and warn all the demi-fae of what's out there and what's coming after them. Then Aelin finds out that because of the slave uprising in Calaculla, the king had all the slaves in Calaculla and in Dovir executed. And she kind of breaks down because one of her big goals was to free the slaves one day. And now they're all dead. And that's pretty horrific. So yeah, a lot happening, a lot of revelations, some really creepy moments, a lot of action, but also a lot of personal growth going on. So I'm gonna go read the rest of the book and I will check back in with my final thoughts. Hello, it is the evening of the live stream. I have finished the book and I have notes for you, so we're going to talk about it. In general, I will just say I do feel like Heir of Fire holds up as one of the best books in the Throne of Glass series. I had originally given this 5 stars. I still am giving it 5 stars. I just think it's really good. I think the character work it does is great. The world building work it does is great. It sets up so many interesting things. It's compelling and compulsively readable for me. I have really enjoyed this experience. So let's talk about the specifics. We start with Dorian. This is where Dorian has more of a turning point. He finds out about the fact that his father had all of those slaves killed, and that is a point at which he realizes how bad his father is. He wants to get Sorsha out and get her safe. Then with Aelin, she is determined to stay and fight with Rowan. And this is where she says, I will stay with you to whatever end. This is going to be a repeated phrase. Again, Sarah J Maas is known for these repeated phrases, these catchphrases, which is really good for merch, I've got to say, but to whatever end is an ongoing thing we're going to see between Aelin and Rowan. He calls her Fireheart for the first time, and she says, I claim you, Rowan Whitethorn, as my friend. I mean, is she going to claim him as more than that? Yes, but this is where it's starting. They realize they've been betrayed by someone because the enemies are quickly coming past all of their traps and things and their wards. There's a battle scene. Narok and the creatures are wearing these black obsidian collars that we know are probably, again, from the king, how he's controlling them. Aelin goes out and risks herself to save everybody else. The creatures say, Goldrin, but you are not Athrol, I think Athrol, beloved of the Dark Queen, and you are not Brannon of the Wildfire. They recognize the sword that she is wielding belonged to one of those two people. So it's interesting. This is when she realizes that these creatures are actually demons or Volg who have brought back to human bodies. They are princes of Volg, a realm of eternal dark and ice and wind. So we're getting some more information. They say, we were never beaten, only contained, and now they're back. Then we see black wolves rush past. This is Rowan's friends who have arrived, who heeded his call when he didn't expect it. Aelin is coughing blood. It's looking pretty serious, but she's the main character, so we know she's not going to die because this is the Sarah J Maas book, which is fine. They find out that the scout leader, Bast, was the one who had betrayed them, had wanted a place of power. He's already dead. Like, he died very quickly. Gavriel stops Rowan from going out and trying to save Aelin from the creature. Internally, Aelin, through these creatures, is having to face all of her trauma and fear. The Volg hiss as they fall into the frozen river at the bottom of her soul. So this is an important scene because this is the moment where Aelin is facing, finally, fully facing, she's been working up to it bit by bit, but fully facing her history, the pieces of her traumatic past that she didn't want to look at, that were holding her back. This is the scene where she finally engages with them and begins the path to healing and is finally able to accept who she really is and accept her power, because before this, all of her burnouts were self-imposed. She was afraid of her own power, and this is why we see there's a frozen river at the bottom of her soul. This is, you know, like a visual representation of what's happening. She enters this memory, and the Volg are with her in this memory, kind of feeding off of her energy through it. A memory of meeting the King of Otterland as a child. He stares at her. She meets Dorian, who's ignored by his father. She offers to be Dorian's friend, but he says he already has a friend, and the way he's described is clearly referring to Chaol. All of a sudden, she starts to feel the pain and heat from her magic. Her mother calls her Fireheart. She feels like a black worm is wriggling into her mind, and she begins to burn up and burn physically. Fire. Her mother puts out the fire with water. The king smiles creepily at her, and it's clear that he was the one messing with her mind and doing this on purpose. Then in the current reality, the demon in Narok says she will be interesting to their liege, so take sips only, don't totally kill her. She goes back into the memory. Her mother assumed that this was an attack from Maeve, and so her parents take them out of the palace to their manor house. And again, this is all orchestrated by the king. He is purposely trying to get them out of the castle so that he can have them assassinated. Elid's mother is kind of a caretaker for Aelin. She was a bastard-born servant who Elid's father, a highborn fae male, fell in love with. Aelin's mother gives her the amulet of Orinth for protection. This is important. It's a large disc with cerulean and a carved white stag wearing a burning crown of gold and words in a strange language on the back. Her mother says it will lead her home, and the next night she lost it because that was the night that she found her parents dead. The amulet probably saved her from being assassinated that night. Lady Marian, who is Elid's mother, is also involved in saving her. She tells her to run and distracts the assassin so that he can't find her. Aelin runs for the river, and as an adult, in this memory, this is the moment when she finally realizes that the king was truly responsible for all of these deaths. The deaths of her parents, the deaths of the court, and that it wasn't her responsibility, even though that was how she felt as a child. This is the moment when she finally accepts her own identity and her queenship. Rowan wants to go after her. Again, he's fighting to try to go after her, but then he sees this arcing light come from where she is, surrounded by these creatures. Again, previous burnouts had been self-imposed. Aelin's fire and magic fully burst forth. She burns them all, and there's a strange mark on her forehead. Rowan then rushes out. He offers her his power through the Karanan, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Karanan blood connection, and Aelin had suspected that they were compatible. Of course they are. Of course they're compatible for this. So they have this blood connection. Together, burn out all of these creatures and Warnock, whatever his name is, and all that remains is 4 wordstone collars. Then we see Sorsha toss a letter out, which is super suspicious that she's writing. Again, I don't really trust her. Chaol comes and they tell Sorsha everything about the wordstones. Dorian suggests that the realm could use a healer queen like Sorsha, so he's interested in potentially marrying her. And she just looks sad, which again is suspicious. They tell Dorian about the towers. And this is a moment where Dorian feels like he's finally ready to be king. He's ready to move past just being the prince who's kind of playing around, and he's ready to take up power and recognizes all of the issues with his father. So again, big turning points for him at the end of this book. Back to Aelin, the battle is over. Her hair is now above the shoulders because of it was cut by the sharp claws of the Vogue, which I just think is interesting that she's had this transformation, and there's also this physical manifestation with her hair that had been really long being cut shorter as she's moving into her power. I think that's interesting. Before he leaves, Gavriel warns them to be careful when they meet with Maeve, because all of the friends are going to be reporting to her before they get there. They realize that with this happening, everyone, including the king, are now going to know that Aelin Galathinius is alive, and Aelin realizes that the amulet of Orinth that her mother gave her was in fact the final word key, taken when Brannon took a medallion from the sun goddess, Mala's high priestess, and then destroyed all evidence of it, and then stole the sun stags. She realizes that Arabin must have it. She's going to have to face him in order to retrieve the amulet and the word key. And she won't tell Rowan where it is or what it is because he's bound to Maeve and she doesn't want him to be forced to tell. But she does share some of her history. They have a moment of connection. Had to change the battery, but they finally leave for Doranel. Aelin is now ready. She's fully embraced her power. Briefly with Aedion and Chaol, Murtaugh finds out that Aelin is alive, so everybody's beginning to find out what's going on. Aelin goes to Doranel. Key thing here is that everything is built with stone, not wood, and there are no signs of plants, which is suspicious for a Fae queen, and we find out pretty quickly why that is. Aelin goes to try to find out more information about the word keys, hoping to find out how to put them back in the gate. Maeve does not actually know how to put the word keys back in the gate, so she's kind of tricked her, told her what she knows, but what she knows is not actually all that helpful. But she does tell Aelin about the Vogue, that Vogue princes don't have their own bodies. They are made of shadow and despair and hatred and need to take on other bodies from other people. The Vogue princes rule the rest of the Vogue, and there are not very many of them, but they are very powerful. Brennan, it turns out, wasn't actually royal born, and the mark on his forehead was originally the mark of the bastard, that means unnamed, but because he was so beloved by Mala and proved his worth, he was made a ruler, and all of his heirs have shared that unnamed mark on their forehead, including Aelin. Maeve also suggests that in a place without magic, which is where a lot of this war is going to be going on, unless they can bring magic back by maybe taking out a tower, for instance, they could cut off the heads of these beings and sever the collar, that might be effective, and that if the king was able to gain all 3 word keys, he could raise an army of the dead, because he would be powerful enough that he could put the Vogue into dead bodies without them needing to be living, which is creepy. So, zombie army. In the middle of this, there's a moment where it seems like the presence of Mala maybe kind of surrounds and comforts Aelin. So she's got some kind of supernatural, spiritual support through this, which is interesting. And Maeve is looking at her like she sees something going on. Maeve can tell Aelin has an idea of where the 3rd key is, but she refuses to say. So Maeve controls Rowan and says, tell what he knows. Obviously, Aelin didn't tell him anything, so he doesn't know anything. So she has Lorcan whip Rowan and tells Aelin she has to tell Maeve if she wants it to stop. Aelin is pissed, so she instead pulls up her magic, burns the river, and threatens to kill all the people in the city if Maeve keeps doing this. She realizes that Maeve originally wanted the keys for herself, and that her beloved Athril, this, warrior who she had fallen in love with, who was a friend of Brannon, realized that and fought her, and she killed him. The Valg didn't kill him. Brennan took the keys, and Maeve made a stone castle to protect herself from Brannon's heirs, because they have this fire ability. But it's not enough to put off Aelin even with all the stone. Aelin then shows her a vision of a possible future with Aelin as a queen, but pretends that it's what's going to happen. Maeve freaks out, and then she finally pulls out that ring that she found in that scabbard, because it turns out that was the family ring that was originally intended for Maeve before she ended up killing her beloved. Aelin realizes this is important to Maeve for whatever reason, and she offers to trade the ring in exchange for Rowan's freedom from his blood oath, even though no one's ever been freed from a blood oath before. And Maeve actually agrees, which is surprising. For whatever reason, she really values this ring. Is it regret? Is it more powerful than we realize? I don't remember. But she agrees. Rowan immediately wants to take a blood oath to Aelin in order to protect her and give Maeve pause in coming after them. So finally, Aelin agrees, and this, I think, is going to end up being an issue because Aedion is expecting to take a blood oath to Aelin instead, and Rowan has already done so expect that to come back around. Rowan then designs some tattoos for her to show her grief over all of the people she lost, and in the process of the tattooing, she finally offers ritual prayers for their deaths that she had owed for a long time. She's finally healing and releasing her grief. And that's, I think, again, really important. Then we have Manon. She's involved in war games where they're collecting these glass eggs. Iskra tries to kill Petra, but Manon and Abraxos save her, but her wyvern dies. Manon's grandmother is pissed that she was more focused on saving Petra than winning the game and beats her really harshly. And again, like, we're seeing the beginnings of Manon waking up to the reality of what she's living in, and that this is maybe not all that there is, and that there is more possibilities. Manon is told to kill this Croaken witch for a new red cloak. And the Croaken witch has a lot to say before this happens, which is interesting. She says that the breaking of their curse has always been within their grasp. They've always known how to do it, even though Manon doesn't think that that's true. It's always been in their hands. And she also criticizes the harmful treatment of their children, making them do things like what is happening to Manon. So Manon does end up killing her, but she's thinking. It planted a seed that she is pondering. Chaol realizes that while Selena might have always chosen him, Aelin won't, and Aelin is the one coming back. That's an important moment, I think, for Chaol. With Dorian and Sorsha realizes she will have to give Dorian up for the greater good. Then all of a sudden, Aedion, Chaol, and Sorsha are called to the king's chambers, which we know is not good. The king's secret guards threaten to kill Sorsha, But Aedion takes the fall for her and says that Chaol has been blackmailing him. Aedion is imprisoned. The king plans his execution as bait for Aelin. He doesn't yet know that Aelin and Selena are the same person, but he does now know that Aelin is alive. Then it turns out that Sorsha was secretly a rebel spy. So all the suspicious stuff, she was falling for Dorian. She wasn't supposed to be, but she was writing letters as a spy. And we later find out that Ren was the one getting those letters. The king has her killed in front of Dorian, and Dorian is grieving her death. And again, this is, feels like kind of the final piece for Dorian to want nothing to do with his father and be ready to fully stand up to him. After she's killed, Chaol stands up to the king. The king tries to kill Chaol, and then Dorian uses his magic to stop this and tells Chaol to run. The king smiles and says he knew Dorian had power, and this whole thing was also a trap for him to get him to use his power, and the king collars Dorian with one of those black wordstone collars. He wants to use him, probably to bring in a big Vulg prince, and everything goes black for Dorian. So that's where he's ending the book. Manon is called for combat on behalf of the king. That's where we're leaving her in Heir of Fire. And then Chaol tosses out his old sword in exchange for his new one. His direction in life has changed. His loyalties have shifted. He is not going back to his family's household. He has other things he's going to be doing. Meanwhile, Aelin is planning to return as Selena in order to get the key from Arabin. She says, I will call in every favor and debt, then I am going to rattle the stars. Rattle the stars is a repeated phrase we're seeing. We're going to keep seeing it throughout the series. You'll see it on merch. And Rowan, meanwhile, is going to be preparing Mistward, so they're going to be separated in the next book. And that is where we ended. It is quite a book. There are so many big character arcs. It's incredible, and I loved it. And we're like out of time on here. So again, that's where it leaves us. I feel like this is a huge turning point in the series. I see why after this, the last thing I wanted to do was go back and read those prequel novellas. I think it is much more interesting to read it before Heir of Fire and have that information informing some of the things that we learn in this book. So I feel like that was definitely a better reading choice, but I loved this. This is one of my favorite books in the series. I think it really holds up, and I'm excited to see where it goes next. So talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts on Heir of Fire. Do you think it holds up? Do you like this one as much as I do? I think it's really good. I love Manon as a character, and we really get her in this book. It's great. Talk to me in the comments down below if you like this video. It always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.